This episode, batteries, some things to know. Batteries, they're an integral part of our modern life, but what do you really know about them? The Handyman pros do a quick synopsis on battery technology, what you need to know about choosing batteries, and a couple of tips that can help save you time, money, and aggravation. Welcome to the Handyman Pros Radio Show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros Radio Show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition's entitled Batteries, Some Things to Know. To help explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy, John. John, what have you been doing this week?
Being cheerful.
Being cheerful. It helps when alcohol's involved. Yeah.
I'm still walking around. I'm happy so far. Good. Everything's good. I'll tell you what, Larry. Based upon a couple of things that we were talking about before the show, I was up in the attic, and I love these headset, the lights that you wear on your head. Because you can use your hands and everything. And I'll tell you what, I have replaced most of my batteries with rechargeable batteries now because I was just getting killed by the cost. And I will tell you that I have noticed a couple things that we're going to talk about here. That headlamp was really, I wasn't getting any time out of that thing anymore. With some of the rechargeable batteries, so that's
which kind of puts you in the dark.
Yeah, puts me. Yeah. I was in the dark, baby, and I found out why, and I should have known better. But that's some of the things we're going to talk about when we get into discussing batteries and what the folks out there need to know about rechargeable batteries, as well as non-rechargeable.
Right. So, as we said in the intro, today batteries are an integral part of your world, right? So you use batteries all the time. You might not even realize it, right? But I mean, everybody knows about their cell phones, and they know. But think about the batteries that you use that you don't think about, right? So your car battery, right? I mean, you don't think about it till the darn thing dies, right? And then you're like, oh, I need a new battery, right? And
went through it.
Just went through it, right? And everybody's gone through it. And your cell phones and your laptops and your cameras and your this and your that. And I mean, there's a battery in almost everything. In our case, in our headlamps and our tools, we're using, we've basically gone, all our power tools now are cordless, and they're all run on batteries. So we got thinking about it, and John and I we both used to play with remote control airplanes a lot. It's a long story why we don't anymore, but we won't get into that. But we learned, John, would you say we learned a lot from our RC remote control world experience about batteries?
Yeah, it really does bring you back to your electronics class. If anybody's had those in their past, when you were talking about, especially what we were doing and what kind of things that we had to figure out in terms of putting motors and what kind of batteries and controllers and things together and voltage and amperage and
watts and
watts and the capacities in terms of milliamp hours and things like that. You really had to start to calculate those things.
And it was science, baby.
It was science. It really and guess what? Science worked.
It worked most of the time.
Yeah, it was back to my electronic classes, and I was like, whoa. Yeah, I had forgotten some of this stuff,
power to weight ratios and all kinds of cool things. But anyway, that we learned. So we're probably maybe 10 years out of this gig from doing it every single week. But at that time, John, would you say we were really on the cutting edge of battery technology?
Yeah, so I would absolutely say that, and because it's a hobby, right? It's a hobbyist thing,
right?
And the batteries that we use, Larry, as you know, were called LiPo batteries.
Yeah, lithium polymer.
Lithium polymer batteries, and you really didn't see those in any consumer products. Everything else was other types of batteries, but the ones that we were using were, pretty much cutting edge, and you had to be really careful, of those things on how you charged them and things like that. That's why they didn't really release those things to the general public per se for the consumer products, because they're pretty volatile. If you don't know what you're doing.
You think? We'll tell some stories in a little while. We're not gonna belabor that right now. Yeah, we're gonna talk about some safety sides of things. But we'll talk about pretty funny. Yeah, we'll talk about some of our personal experiences with really cutting edge technology at the time in the battery world. And since then, we know the battery world has changed a little bit. But what we wanted to let you, our listeners, know is that the basics of battery technology has not changed at all from the day when batteries were first created. Right, so the basics of what you need to know is what we're going to impart as part of this show. So first off, we wanted to just discuss rechargeable versus non-rechargeable batteries, right? So you can go down to the store and buy alkaline batteries, right, John? I mean, and they work really well, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's done it. Everybody goes down and buys a pack of batteries, and those are the non-rechargeable ones. And please do not ever put those in a recharger.
Yes.
Do not.
Which is another thing we'll talk about in the safety series.
Don't throw them in a fire either. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yep.
So you know what those are, and you basically kind of have a sense of how long they last, whether you kind of time it or not. You kind of have a sense, and they do a very good job. But on the other side of things, they cost money, and some of them are, especially when you're using stuff over and over again. I was using a lot of non-rechargeable batteries for my keyboard and mouse on my computer. And all of a sudden I was like, whoa, I'm starting to feel like I'm racking up some bucks here throwing that stuff away. So I went to rechargeables. And then pretty soon, of course, all of our tools and things that we use are rechargeables.
Right.
And then I started to put rechargeable batteries in my headlamps and, everything else.
And the next thing that's what most of what you have, right?
Yeah, I basically have made the switch.
So let's talk about batteries too. So when we talk about rechargeables, right, there are two basic types, right? There's wet cells and dry cells. So let's just quick talk about that. So
So the wet cells, everybody knows, is your car battery,
right?
Which was a lead acid battery, lead and sulfuric acid, and Larry, I know that you were telling me that things have changed over the time with that now.
A little bit, but they infuse lead into fabric now, but there's still a lead component to it. But the reason they're called wet cells is that there's acid in there, and there's actually there's liquid inside the battery. So it's a vessel that contains liquid, right? And that's right. It happens to be an acid-based battery. And then there's dry cells, and dry cells are more like what we consider modern rechargeable batteries are. They're not wet inside, right? So they're made of a bunch of different things, but just depends on which particular chemistry you have. And we're not doing a chemistry show, but we did want to talk a little bit of a brief history on dry cell batteries, because wet cell batteries basically are the same as they've been for 100 years, I guess. The lead acid battery hasn't changed. Yeah. It's changed slightly, but the basic premise of it is still the same. Yeah. So, and we're not getting into this great technical conversation about it. So dry cells, let's talk a little quick brief history.
So, when I was, most of the batteries that I had interfaced with, and at the first part of all this was nickel cadmium batteries, NiCads, and you'll still see those around. They were used quite extensively in aviation, and I've done a lot of work on those things with all kinds of. I'm not going to get into all kinds of the deep discharges and stuff, but there's characteristics about NiCads that were good, and it was the best thing going at the time for rechargeable without having the big heavy lead acid type of batteries,
Right.
And then we kind of moved on in the world of nickel metal hydride batteries, and that was a different type of chemistry than NiCad, and there was advantages to it. They lasted longer. A lot of times that these batteries, when you charged them up, their shelf life on the charge was very limited, very short. Yeah. And it was very disappointing, right? I mean, because if you were continually using them or charging them, yeah, you couldn't count on them, and that
Right,
was and that
right.
and that became something that was really really appealing to the consumer out there with the alkaline batteries, the non-rechargeable batteries,
Right, they had
because you
long
could
shelf
stick
lives, or have long shelf lives.
exactly
Yeah.
you could stick them in the drawer and they would be, boy, they'd be fresh, a year or two later actually. But so we're talking about rechargeable batteries. So then you had the nickel metal hydride batteries, and then now we kind of move on to lithium ion batteries.
Yeah, or lithium-based products, which there's a bunch of
Yeah,
different chemistries, and we're not going to get into that. But most of what you're seeing today is lithium-ion batteries.
lithium ion, and this is what everybody would has in their cell phones.
Yeah, and this is really so. Lithium-ion is kind of the best of right now. It's the best technology that's out there for a lot of reasons. We're not going to get into the real details of it, but it is light. All of the previous batteries, NiCads and nickel metal hydrides, were relatively heavy, and they were relatively large
Right.
in form factor for the amount
That's
of
right.
energy that they stored. And it's not been until so, folks, we don't know how old you are, and we don't care. But if you remember back in the initial days of cell phones, because we're going to use cell phones as a great example, right? When the first cell phones first came out, they were in what, John? A bag, right? You remember they were in a
Oh,
bag.
yeah.
And how much of that bag was actually the electronics that ran the cell phone? Not much.
Yeah, the whole yeah.
It was mostly battery, right? And
Right.
they were big and they were clunky and they were heavy. And I don't remember what batteries they used. I'm sure they used nickel metal hydride. They
Yeah,
might have
they
used
They
NiCads.
actually used a sealed. They actually used like a sealed lead battery.
Oh,
lead
really?
acid.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty. It was pretty awful.
Yeah. So modern electronics have largely been the result of battery technology getting better, and lithium ion and lithium, the lithium based products is what's really made your cell phones today really small and super powerful. So
That's right.
I mean, as we always say, a cell phone today has more power than what we put a man on the moon with. In fact, your calculator has more power than what we put a man on the moon with. But be that as it may, this technology base has is continuing to evolve, and we know there's batteries. There's people out there working on battery technology right now to run bigger, more powerful things, and we'll touch on some of that when we get down into some of the battery basics. But some of this stuff doesn't scale up into big size well, so it works great in your phone, but it won't run the car that well, right? It won't run that big heavy thing. And we're not going to get into a big debate on this, but we just want you to kind of understand. But lithium ion has changed the way we live today, because now we all have a phone. We all have, John, you and I were talking about before the show. I've got my security cameras are all run on batteries, and so forth and so on. Basically, what can't you get that's battery? Our tools are lithium-ion based tools, So pretty substantial change in our lifestyle due to battery technology, right? Which is why it's so important. Do you have anything to add to that, John?
No, one of the things, and through the progression of time here with the different types of chemistry and the technologies of batteries is, you wanted to get to, like you said, I'll just sum up a little bit of here, is that the form factor, the size of it, the shape of it have become smaller. The energy that the densities of the battery have become much greater, better, more power coming out of there in a smaller form factor. Plus, what we want to know as consumers is that they once they're charged in the lithium state, in these new lithium ion batteries, they hold their charge for a long time,
really long time,
without dissipating. They'll dissipate a little bit over time, but not like the old ones.
Not like the old ones.
So this allows all the creativity now of being able to make all these electronics that have become very small, but yet last a long time, and you can put a lot of power inside of them. That this is the kind of progression that we're all kind of going through. Now the show here is, we wanted to talk about this because you're interfacing with these different types of technology with, your tools.
Well, your tools, all your tools, right? Your tools and electronics. So I consider a computer to be a
everything,
tool, right?
Everything. So we wanted to kind of go through that a little bit. So now you kind of got the groundwork of where we're headed here.
Yeah, and folks, have you ever had a battery that you just feel just runs out of power too soon? So that's that's part of what we're going to talk about, because that's where we're going with this, right? So John, let's talk about battery basics, right? So what are the three big things in a battery, right? There's voltage, there's amperage, and there's storage capacity, right?
That's right.
So
that's right.
Let's talk voltage first thing, just cause.
Yeah, well, voltage is basically the force or the pressure, if you will, like a pipe. You know, the amount of water pressure behind a pipe. That's what voltage is.
Right.
So you have the different voltages in different size form factors, and you'll see these cells are generally 1.5 volts or thereabouts, right?
Well, most lithiums they're 3 volts in lithium generally, but anyway,
I'll just go back, and if you're going to go buy a AAA battery or a AA battery, right?
Yeah, it's 1.5 volts.
Yeah. So, but you can get it in that form factor. You can get it in a C. You can get it in a D. They scale up, which means that there's more capacity inside those batteries, and the same voltage, right? But they're just heftier for the milliamp hour rating of those batteries, which is the amount of gas in the tank, if you will.
Right. Great analogy.
So, and then you have the amps, and that's really how fast that voltage is rushing through, based upon how it's being discharged.
Let's step back on voltage for just a second. So the way that battery packs increase voltages, they do what's called Wireman series, and you actually add up the voltage of the individual cells. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you either do series or parallel,
right?
And there's two different reasons for that. One is to increase voltage. One is to add capacity. To the overall battery pack.
Right. So for voltage, they Wireman series, and that increases it. So it's generally, if you use 3 volts, it's generally, so like we use 18-volt packs in our tools, right? So we know that we take 18 and we divide it by 3, right? And we end up with 6 battery cells in there. And concurrently, John, you and I have torn apart our battery packs on our tools, and lo and behold, there's 6 cells in there, right? So this is how, and when you go to another, for example, there's a tool company that sells 40-volt tools, and they sell 18-volt tools, right? So that 40-volt tool is really it's 2 18-volt packs plus 1 more cell on it, basically. So it's what? So I said 6, so it's 12. It's 13 cells in there. We'll make that 40 volts. And the volts is, again, that's the pressure and that sort of thing. But that's just to kind of give you a conceptual, like what's the difference in the volts, right? If you took 2 of your car batteries and you wired them in series, you now have a 24-volt battery. So the concept is the same whether you're dealing with wet cells. And by the way, big trucks generally start on 24 volts, just so you understand. Not that, just so you kind of understand. But that they just take 2 batteries and they wire them into series, and then you get 24 volts, which gives you a little more power is what it is. And so that's just want to have that concept out there so you understand, why is this one 18 volts and this one's 9 volts or whatever. That's the basics on voltage, right? Did we cover that pretty well, John?
Yeah, it's a good primer.
Okay. So amps are what?
Well, the amperage is, like I was just saying, that the amperage is really, how much is rushing through the pipe.
Right.
Based upon how much resistance is on the other side. I'm not going to go through the whole scientific thing, the physics of it, if you will, but it's basically, how fast are you discharging that battery?
Right. Which is gallons per minute.
With that comes consequences, yeah, right, exactly. That's a good way to look at it. And, with that comes, some things, right? That's really determines a lot of power that happens at the other end of this thing,
right.
In the tool. But just know that, the easiest way to think about it is that, when you're using a tool or you're using anything with a battery in it and the thing starts getting warm, it's putting out some power.
It's putting out some amps.
And,
yep.
Yeah, and that's the amperage.
Or you've been letting it sit in the sun, which you shouldn't do. But anyway, be that as it may. All right. So then the other big capacity, or the other big thing there, is called we call it the storage capacity. It is rated as milliamps per hour, or it'll sometimes be referred to as amp hours, right? AH or MAH, right? And this is the part that volts and amps, for most of the things that we're using out there in the world, you really don't even need to worry about it. Now, I will say, just make sure that your voltage is the same. So you don't want to run, if something is rated to run at 1.5 volts, don't put a 9-volt battery in it, right? Makes common sense, but it's not, it makes sense, right? And in most cases, it's almost impossible to do that. There are a few select cases where the battery form factors will fit, like particularly in certain power tools, older ones at this point, but older power tools where they made 18-volt batteries were the same as 12-volt batteries. And when you put an 18-volt battery into a 12-volt tool, it sort of changed how that tool worked, like incredibly, and in an incredible way. Didn't necessarily destroy it, but it kind of made it unusable. To be honest, it made it unusable because it's a long story, and I don't want to get into it. But it makes it run super fast, is what it does. It makes it run fast, and so you were like, "What the hell's going on?" And then you realize you put the wrong battery in it. So generally, between volts and amps, it's not something that most people have to worry about. The form factor of the battery is going to tell you, like, you don't worry about volts and amps in your cell phone. You just don't. It's not going to generally be something. But the next thing we're going to talk about is something that you can control, and that's storage capacity. And storage capacity is basically, John said it earlier, how much gas is in the tank, right?
Yeah. And so here's the one of the takeaways here is that, I was I was telling you that I was switching batteries, from non-rechargeable, alkaline batteries to rechargeable batteries, like in my headset, my headlamp. And I wasn't, and I actually experienced this on my keyboard and mouse too. I went out and I bought batteries, and it was the capacity of these rechargeable batteries were about half of the non-rechargeable batteries. And I didn't know that because a lot of this stuff is really, it's not advertised on the package very prominently, let's say.
Right.
So let me put a stake in the ground here. For people out there, the little batteries that you might use in your keyboard or your mouse or things can be anywhere from a AAA, the little ones, or the AA batteries. So
stake the ground with AA. Everybody knows AA batteries.
The AA batteries from an alkaline perspective are about what's known as 2,500 milliamp hour batteries. Okay,
MAH, milliamp hour.
MAH, right? So now, comparatively, when you go to get a rechargeable battery, you need to not surprised and look for a rechargeable battery that is very close to the 2,500. They're going to cost a little bit more, but a lot of them are sold that might only be half that much gas in the tank, let's say. And then you're going to say, well, wait a minute, these rechargeable batteries are awful. They don't last. They don't put out the power like alkaline, the regular batteries do. But just know that, both AAA and AA batteries, have a stake in the ground of somewhere around 2,500 for AA's and about 11 or 1,200 for AAA's. But when you go get rechargeables, they're not prominently marked how much milliamp hours. You really have to dig for that. So I went out and I bought some, in this case, AAA batteries that were only 700 mAh, which, MAH, which is about half of what a standard alkaline is. I bought some AA's that were somewhere around 1,100, and the other ones were somewhere, the regular ones we just talked about were 2,500. Well, lo and behold, right?
They last about half the time, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's no surprise that, you put them in your keyboard, your mouse, your headlamps, your whatever, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, these things are awful. They don't last. And then you kind of like, I hate rechargeable batteries. Well, you just bought the wrong ones.
You bought and that's our point. That's the tip, is understand that they come in different specs, if you want to call it that.
That's right.
But they come with different size gas tanks, and the form factor, meaning the size of the battery, is exactly the same.
That's right.
But the amount that it holds. I'm going to use my cell phone example. So I had an iPhone 6, blah blah blah. Anyway, I was going to change the battery out myself. Well, I take the battery out, and on those batteries, they happen to be a flat type battery, and on that battery it said 1,200 mAh. And when I went to buy the new batteries, I could have replaced it with a 1200 mAh, but instead they also had 2200 mAh batteries. And me knowing what I know, and this is where it's important to you folks, I said, shoot, man, no, give me the bigger ones, right? Give me the 22. And they were slightly more money, but I was like, I'm going to get extended life out of, I don't have to charge so much. And sure enough, it was almost double the time it took. I got double my cell phone time out of it. And so it's like I had to charge half as much. And for me, that's important because we're in the field a lot and blah, blah, blah. So it's important to not do that. The other thing too, John, is that in our power tools, right, when we use, so I carry the Ryobi tools, right, and I have a combination of 1.5, 2.0, and then 4 AH, they call them AH, but it's still MAH. It's milliamp hours batteries. But I use those, and I use those for different tools depending on how much usage I'm going to get out of them, right? So, and they'll work across. Either one works in either tool. Doesn't matter because they're all 18 volt and they all work. And if I'm really doing, like, say I'm using the impact gun and I'm putting screws in the deck. Well, if I've got a bazillion screws to put in, I'll slap a 4 AH battery in there because I know I'm going to get twice as long as my 2 AH battery out of it, and I don't have to worry about it running out halfway through the job, right? But a lot of times, like if I'm like when I carry my drill with me, I put a 2H battery in because it's also about half the weight, and since it sits on my tool belt, I don't want to carry around a brick of batteries. But it's selecting the battery for the right tool, and in that case, I carry both of them. But I know, like John, you were saying about your blower, right? Tell the blower story.
Yeah, well, if you're using a blower, use something that's really going to be running a lot. You're going to be pulling a lot of amps for a long time,
right?
And when that battery gets hot, that thing's really been working. So I think, Larry, from the perspective, you're just talking about the different size batteries and things. And folks, when you're out there looking for the batteries, this is what you're going to be confronted with, to choose, because they sell these batteries in these different sizes. Still all 18 volts, let's say, in this case, but they have more gas in the tank. Now, with more gas in the tank comes a little bit, in this case, they're bigger. So, a lot of times you're not going to need a great big battery on a drill.
Right.
But I will say that you can't, if you use a small battery on something that takes a lot of power, like a saw, our circular saws, for instance.
Right.
You're going to want a bigger battery. And I know this kind of, there's discussions all over the place on this, but it's true that the bigger, even though they have more gas in the tank, these bigger batteries, they also will kick out more amps.
Yeah, it's a chemistry problem, and we're not going to get into it. But there's a reason, and it is true.
Right. So. And that is why they perform better. Bigger batteries perform better in heavy duty, even though they're the same. They perform better in different tools.
Right.
Just to be aware of that, out there. So. But you're right. You don't want to carry around a great big battery on something that doesn't require it. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. Yeah, it's matching the jobs. But so that probably for the average person that we're listening to, the biggest thing to worry about is that AH. And you made the great point, John. Particularly on those smaller batteries, you really have to look at the AH because you'll pick that wrong battery and you go, these things are all no good. Because I've been there. I did that too. I did exactly the same thing. That's why we're going to have this conversation. Get the bigger capacity. It's amazing. We can't do anything with batteries, John, without talking a little bit about safety.
Yeah. And why are we laughing?
Well, we're laughing because in the RC world, when we were playing around with some of these, at the time they were very, very exotic batteries. I'd still almost call them exotic batteries. And we were really on the cutting edge of some of this lithium technology. And they had some quirks, I think is a little bit of an understatement.
Well, to put it in perspective, some of these batteries that we had, we had a 3-cell battery that would be, that probably that fits in the palm of your hand.
Yep.
That would start a car.
Yep. Absolutely.
That would kick out that kind of amperage that would start a car.
Yeah.
Not to go through, the physics and, Ohm's law and everything,
right.
But that is a incredible story, about a battery that's that small kicking out
we were doing
kind of amps.
We were doing stuff where we were talking about this before, but two things: we could weld with them. We actually could create enough amps that we could actually weld steel with them, and these were all batteries that were all small enough to fit. Form factor would fit in your hands. They were no more than 8 inches long. That was for me that was a big battery, and I could weld with them. And the other thing that we were talking about that we could do with them was, I just drew a blank, John. What were we talking about? We can weld with them, and the power that we were generating. Start a car for sure. That was no problem.
I mean,
at all.
They were just incredible. Now with that came a lot of.
We were talking about horsepower, John.
A lot of issues, a lot of issues around there, and so we used to go out and we used to have these planes that some of the little motors on these things were kicking out. What, a horsepower, 2 horsepower on a little motor? You would not even know it, but when you do the math on it, volts times amps equals watts, and 746 watts or somewhere there's about is a horsepower. So you can do the math on that. And some of these batteries that we had were. What, 12 volt batteries that were kicking out 60
18,
amps?
Yeah. I mean, we were easily generating 2 to 3 horsepower on a plane that weighed, 20 ounces.
Yeah.
We tend to overpower a little bit. Not to get into it, but anyway.
But then with that kind of current draw, that amp is that you can only send so much amps through a
wire.
Specific size wire
and solder.
So when you test out a battery and you really go to short that thing out, or really pull a lot of amps on it, things start to burn up.
Yeah, they do. And the initial batteries, the lithium polymer batteries that we had, were very, very. I don't want to say they weren't dangerous, but you had to be very, very aware of that. You had to be aware that you could draw enough heat through those wires to melt the solder on the joints, because we had it happen, and which is pretty hot. And the other side is that they were also lithium polymer in particular, lithium in general, folks. If you don't know this, does not. When oxygen touches it, it ignites. So it does not explode, as they say, but it ignites. It burns. It burns like magnesium. It burns extremely hot, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,500 to 4,000 degrees. And there were 2 basic safety issues that we had at the time, which was charging. You could overcharge the batteries, which in turn would break the seals and cause them to ignite. Now, this technology today has changed. Lithium ion did not do that as much. It was very, very difficult to get a lithium ion battery to ignite. That's why that's most of the technology that you see. But also, the lithium polymer was very susceptible. If you damaged the battery, it would ignite. And we both, John, I almost burned my house down, and you, what did you do? You almost did something.
I had one light up on a bench out in, thank God we were out in the middle of nowhere, really.
Yep.
But I turned around for a few minutes, and the next thing I know, this thing is, blowing and going, man,
like a Roman candle.
Flare.
Yeah, like a flare.
It was going crazy. I remember you flying around, and I don't know how fast that thing was going, but it just burst into flames. So it's one of those things. But folks, everybody out there, you're not using these kind of batteries,
and you're not doing what we were doing with them.
Yeah, you're not doing anything what we were doing. But we certainly got an appreciation of battery safety.
Right?
That was a lesson in that.
So let's talk about lead acid on the safety side. So your car battery, right?
Yeah. So folks, this isn't a lesson in jumping cars and things like that. But when you hook up and jumper cables and stuff, you do not want to spark. Do not want to spark that battery. Sparks around that battery, because it's hydrogen.
Right.
In the chemical process of charging, it releases hydrogen with the lead and the sulfuric acid, and that stuff is very explosive.
Think Hindenburg.
Think
Hindenburg.
When you're doing it, make sure that both your jumper cables are not on the terminals of those batteries. Make sure one of them's on some other ground somewhere, and then the positive is on the battery. But I've seen it happen. I've done it. I was welding one time with a battery out of my Jeep in the garage, and a spark a spark went over, and it blew the battery apart.
Yeah.
And of course, inside that battery is all acid, and so
Right.
the acid flew all over the place and all over me, and basically ate my monkey suit I was wearing at the time as a mechanic off me. It's like, man.
Yeah, and
So
it is
I just-
sulfuric acid as well, which
Yeah.
is very, very caustic, especially to skin. So
Yeah.
you want to be super careful. Even be careful if you're moving a car battery around. Even be careful dropping it, because if it breaks open, it doesn't have to explode. But if you puncture the side of it, and as you know, if you've ever dealt with car batteries, they're pretty robust, right? I mean, would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
They're robust for a reason, and that's because they're full of acid. So you don't want that acid spilling out, onto anything that you value, which would be pretty much anything that you
right,
have, I guess.
Right. Yeah, so stay away from that.
Yeah, so just be careful with that, and and understand that they do in that, as you said, in that charging process, they produce some hydrogen, which can cause explosive. It can be explosive if it's not properly vented. John, yours was sitting on the bench, so it probably just blew the sides out. What happens in your car is it's almost like a barrel of a gun. If it's sitting down in that battery well, it shoots the acid up, and guess where your face is? It's usually above it. So it's not a whole lot of fun. It doesn't happen very often, but you only need it to happen once to have a really bad day.
Exactly.
Right.
And I will tell you that if anything ever happens, you'll notice that the emergency personnel on a car scene, the first thing that they'll do in a really bad wreck, they come over and with a big pair of clippers and
Cut
clip
that
the
wire.
battery cables immediately.
Yep.
Immediately, because when that fire starts in a car or anything like that, they got to get that out of there, because that'll take that battery and just blow it up.
Yeah, it turns it into an additional explosion source.
Yeah, you get some issues there.
So, all right. So we already talked about lithium batteries, about don't puncture them. It's most of them are in hard cases again. Like all our tool batteries are in a really hard plastic case. In fact, we tried to destroy one. It was almost impossible. I was really impressed, actually, John. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
So don't puncture them and don't overcharge them. But today, the technology in the chargers won't allow you to overcharge them. It won't allow them to get hot. It's really superior. It's why they're built the way they're built, and it's fantastic. It's why they can offer it out. So my basic point there is you really don't have to worry about your lithium batteries anymore, other than puncture, meaning don't crush it. Don't drive something over it. And then it has to be fully charged before it does anything anyway, so most of the time that's not going to be the issue. We did want to talk a little bit about alkaline batteries, right? And I wanted to relate a story. So my daughter, at one time, she was having a little party outside the house, and we had this big bonfire going. Well, somebody, in their eminent wisdom, threw some batteries in the fire. And I'd always heard, don't burn alkaline batteries, right? Don't set batteries on fire. Well, I found out why. When they went off, they were like shotgun shells. And I mean, the problem was they were shotgun shells in the fire, and it blew sparks. I mean, all over. They were down in the embers, right? And it blew embers out for about 15 feet all the way around. And fortunately, I guess it was fortunately, nobody was around the fire at the time they touched off. But I was close enough that I heard them go off, because it was like a gunshot. And I see this shower of embers, and this is in a field, and I'm like, what the heck just happened? And then I realized that somebody had thrown their batteries in there, and they had thrown 2 batteries in there because they went off. It was 2 explosions, and then I had to go around and put hot spots out all around the fire. But the safety issue there would have been if people had been around the fire, and thank God they weren't. Here are these hot embers, and it would have landed on them, and it could have burned them. So don't burn your alkaline batteries, please. Dispose of them properly. So. Do we have anything else on safety, John? Oh, one other thing, anytime you're using a fairly strong battery, including your car battery, really don't cross the 2 terminals.
Never.
Yeah.
Don't do that, folks.
Yeah, especially with metal. Like, you'll get an instant arc, and that instant arc could burn you or burn whatever's around it, even on a 12-volt battery in your car.
I've burned up plenty of wrenches and screwdrivers.
Yeah, and that was all on accident, right?
All on accident.
All on accident. So just be aware of that. Just be aware that it can happen. We want you to be safe, obviously, right? All right.
Yes.
John, we got anything else for batteries? We got it covered?
No, I think this is a good start. This is a good start, and we'll add some things as we as we go along here. But no, it's a good start, Larry.
All right. Well, folks, if you have any questions, send us an email, questions@handymanprosradio.com. You can join our Facebook group at Handyman Pros. Our website, you can leave us voice messages, all kinds of cool things. We love doing this job, don't we, John? You know, some of our best listeners, I swear, I think they're listening from outer space because I continually have these things landing in my yard. What are they, John?
It's probably a spaceship, Larry.
I know.
Probably a spaceship.
And I'm constantly...
Did you check out how they're powered?
I've been taking them apart. They've got some kind of battery technology that I'm not aware of, but, you know, next thing I know, I'm going to take one of them apart.
Need that for a Tesla.
There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.